I hit a key, it gets loud, I stop playing the key, I stop playing the key, it stops. And we're hearing a basic wave shape. It's a wave shape, it's a sound that's being generated by the oscillator. So in a subtractive synthesizer, this is what he was saying. You start out with, right, it's a waveform, it's got overtones in it. You hear a note, and then in addition to that note, you hear a character in the sound, right? And that's the frequencies that are contained in that waveform. I'm just saying this in a really basic way. I know it doesn't sound like, I'm just trying to keep it simple, but different waveforms have different characteristics. So we would choose maybe a bright waveform to make a bright sound, or we could choose a more simple, that's a triangle wave. And it doesn't have as many overtones or harmonics in it. It sounds darker. Choose a square wave or a pulse wave. And then sculpt that sound by controlling how loud it is, right? It could fade in, it could fade out, it could start loud and decay away. And we can also sculpt that sound, the tone of that sound using a filter, right? So the output of that oscillator is running into a filter which removes going to remove the higher frequencies out. And that's something else that I can change over time. And to control that, we have control signals. On this synth, it's called a modifier. And what it's referring to here is an envelope. It's a control signal that will connect to, let's say, the filter frequency, and I can choose how long it takes to go from dark to bright and then back down again. So and I can change or modulate the tone by changing or modulating the cutoff frequency. So I set that attack time so that it would take me to go from the lowest point to the highest point. And then there's a decay time, how long it takes to go back down. And then I can set a level where it goes back down to. That's the sustain level, where I hold the note down and it stays there at the sustain level. And I can do that for the tone, and I can do that for the volume. So you could hear it's like fading in and fading out, basically. Or if I want it to be a percussive sound, I would have the attack time be very short and the decay very short, and it's going to decay away to silence more quickly. So that's subtractive synthesis in a nutshell. There's more to it, but basically that's what you're doing. You're starting out with a waveform, and you are controlling how loud it is over time, and you're controlling the tone over time using the filter. And you can also modulate the frequency of the oscillators or the pitch. So in this synthesizer, I can use, you asked about the LFO, right? And an LFO is a low frequency oscillator. It's the same as the oscillators that are making these waveforms that we can hear that have these different shapes. But instead of producing an audible signal, it's used as a control voltage, actually. So we can use the shape of that waveform to change the parameter of something else. So I could have the pitch rising and falling, I could have the tone rising and falling, or the amplitude rising and falling.
The LFO is just the waveform change?
time. You're kind of combining different waveforms together to create a more complex type of synthesis. So.
I just coming from playing with VCV rack and stuff. Basically, synthesis is you have an electrical impulse signal, so maybe something that's long and static with a long attack, and then you're taking a waveform, adding a certain waveform to it, and then modulating it. Is that pretty much it? But then everything else is extra?
Yeah, I mean, roughly. Sorry, bear with me a moment. I'm going to plug my MIDI controller back in. It's a lot nicer to play music with this keyboard as opposed to this keyboard. So that was our very rough explanation of subtractive synthesis. And of course, you know, in the classroom setting, we go a little bit more detail. We break things down, but the idea there, though, is once we get some of these basics, we start making music with them. So I was thinking, I could sketch out something today and use the different types of synthesis, and not necessarily explain every little thing I'm doing, but just so we can kind of become familiar with the palette, like the different sounds that we can make with the different types of synthesis. And like, why would you choose a subtractive synthesizer? Or like, why would I choose the Mini Moog over something more complex and modern and digital, like Serum, which is a wavetable synthesizer, which is, has a very different sound and capability and can do actually much more complex sounds than the Moog, Mini Moog can. So why would I choose those? Why would I choose an FM synthesizer or a wavetable synth, or why would I use samples? And that's another thing we do in the course is use sampling, but not in the sense of like taking a beat from here and a sound from there, but like taking audio and using it as the basis for a new sound, like using sampling in a synthesis context. Why would I do that and not just use another synth? So let's see. I'll just start shaping the sound I have. It's already, I should make a horn. We got the traffic outside. This type of synth, like the Mini Moog, is very famous for certain types of sounds that it's really good at, like warm, fat bass sounds, or kind of bright leads. You wouldn't necessarily, you can kind of trick it into playing harmony. It's a monophonic synth. It can only play one note at a time. I can't play chords on this thing. But there are some ways that you can get harmony out of it, but it's not the first synth you would think of if you want to play big, lush string pads or something like that, or something with many notes at the same time. This is a melodic instrument primarily, so that's a lot of times producers will go for something like this for a bass sound. So let's start there. And we'll go back to this template. I've got the sawtooth wave and the square. And the square wave sounds a little fatter, so that's a good one to start with for a simple bass line. It's a really simple but very useful sound. I'm sure you've heard sounds just like this in electronic dance music especially. So, where should we go stylistically? Anyone want to help me choose your own adventure?